Hello everyone. Today's webinar is a special one, recorded in celebration of World Otter Day, which is on 27th of May of 2026. My name is Max, and on behalf of the Otter Youth Circle, it is my great honor to introduce Dr. Nicole Duplaix, one of the world's most influential otter conservationists. Nicole has spent more than 5 decades studying and championing otters across the globe. She has played a pivotal role in the IUCN SSC Otter Specialist Group, and she is a driving force behind international otter research and conservation. She has helped shape how the world understands and protects these remarkable animals. And in this special lecture titled The Past, Present, and Future of Otters, Nicole will take us through the global story of otters, how our knowledge has evolved, the challenges that otter faces today, and what the future may hold for the conservation. And without further ado, Nicole, over to you.
Hello, everybody. It's wonderful to have a special day for otters in the world. And to talk about otters is even better. We're going to look forward to looking back. That means we're going to start with what has happened to otters in the last 50 years and determine how the future will help or maybe even destroy otters. So first of all, I started studying otters in 1966 at the Bronx Zoo in New York, known today as WCS. And there were 5 different otters in the zoo. But when I started studying them and, of course, doing research in the library, I found there was virtually nothing known about otters. 1920 books or that were written in different languages, but the only thing I could do was basically look at each otter in the zoo, take notes, and move forward. The Nothing was known, but not only that, a lot of bad things were happening everywhere. It was an animal that was hunted everywhere. In Great Britain, for instance, they had a sport using dogs to find and kill otters. Uh, there was very poor enclosures in zoos, mostly water, not much dry land, no places to dig. It was not at all to the otter's liking, and not surprisingly, there was no otter breeding in captivity. Uh, then, in those days, animal dealers all over the world would contact the zoo and say, "We have an elephant, we have a gorilla, or we have otters," and send them. But they were sent in very poor enclosures, and the otters died from overheating, or when they got there, the zoos didn't know what injections to give them, and so they died very quickly of everything from parvovirus and uh, even even the most common vaccines for dogs were not suitable because they were live vaccines, and otters could only be treated with dead vaccines, etc. So the death during the transport was a serious problem because a lot of otters were, so to speak, wasted before arrival. We didn't know anything about their husbandry or their behavior, sometimes even where they came from, and they were misidentified. Uh, Sea otters, which were in those days are much, much rarer in California, were doing well in certain parts of Alaska, and they thought, oh, we'll just transport them here and there. But they didn't know how to do that. So the sea otters died during transport, again, from usually overheating. So things were not good. And not only that, but many of these otters were being killed for the fur trade, particularly in Europe and South America, and in some states in the United States. So it was becoming a not only a catastrophic time for otters, but also tigers and other animals that people like to wear as coats. Um, so what happened to change this? Well, three things happened in the early 70s. One was we created an otter specialist group in the SSC IUCN, which had all kinds of guidelines and recognition, and we started developing a plan. At that time, there was really only one otter uh, field researcher, Sam Erlinger, and this was in the 60s in Sweden, who did the first field work. So we thought this is what we need to do. We need to have Sam Erlingers in every country where otters occur. And we eventually did. So the creation of the Otter Specialist Group was a start, reaching out, trying to find people who had some knowledge of otters to join. And we held our first meeting in Suriname, where at the time I was studying giant otters. And again, the conclusion of the meeting was we need people, we need more knowledge, and we're going to create not only guidelines, but also have meetings as often as possible in different regions. So that was one thing. The next thing that we did was to create traffic, to analyze the data of the import and export of otters from different countries. And at the same time, which was extremely important, CITES, the Convention on the Trade in Endangered Species, was created also by the IUCN. And I was at its first meeting in 1977, I think it was. No, sorry, yes, 1977 in Costa Rica. And we immediately put, it was much easier in those days, we immediately put giant otters on Appendix 1 and all the other otters on Appendix 2, which means there was some control. And Brazil was extremely really supported the CITES convention, and that made a big difference because at that time, giant otters were considered one of the 10 most rare carnivores in the world, definitely on their way out. So also I wanted to mention that the first fossil of otters was in the Oligocene about, at least 70 million years ago. And when you look at this little, it was a complete skeleton. It came from France, and it looks exactly like a Eurasian otter today. So otters have fossils in many areas across the globe, and that gave us a beginning of understanding where they came from and what they look like. So now we're going to show you this slide where, oh dear, I'm sorry. It shows where there on this slide, there are 13 otters. And you can see that there are 5 otters from South America, 1 Pacific otter, uh, 4 otters from Asia. This is a Eurasian otter because it occurs from Great Britain all the way across to China, and 3 African species, clawless. This is a uh, 2 clawless otters, and one that looks quite similar to the Eurasian, but is very, very different, the spot-necked otter. Now, we're going to talk about what makes otters similar. They look pretty similar when you look at them, and what makes them different. They are actually 2 types of otters. They are both in appearance, and this goes all the way back to the fossils. Already at the fossil stage, they were 2 types of otters. Their genetics are different and more important in this day and age. Their appearance is relatively similar. They have a long body, butt, and their bones are quite different, including their penis bone, which if I found one, so to speak, somewhere, I could immediately tell you what kind of otter it was. That's how specific it is. And finally, very important, their behavior, because otters are social or not social, and they make very different sounds, for instance. And these are the things that both make otters similar and very different. As one example, this is a Eurasian otter with his, oh, I'm sorry, this is not my fault. Okay. Um, uh, you can see that there are different postures with different screams. And when on the left, the increasing threat or the increasing fear is going down, increasing threat going across, until finally the most afraid otter in the has a wavering scream. So just by looking at otter postures and otter sounds, you can tell what they're doing and thinking. And this is true of otters that are social or not social. Now, remember, we talked about penis bones, and just to show you an example, they are different sizes and different shapes. And I'm sorry, this should be Aonic cinereus, but again, you can tell if this by otters by their penis bones. Now, the Lutra type otter, that's the one that's also called Eurasian otter because it's one of the most widespread smaller carnivores, going from the UK all the way across to China. And the Lutra type otters also are, and in the New World, they're called Lontra and not Lutra, go from basically all the way up to Alaska, all the way down to South America with different species names. So widespread, but not very social. They have vocalizations that are similar. One of them is a greeting chuckle, which is and but they also have, for instance, a scream, which is similar in otters, which is that extreme fear screen. Now, in the New World, there are 4 species plus one new one, which we'll talk about. So there are 5 species now. And in the Old World, there are 3 species. So this is an otter that is not very social, does not live in groups. The male may have a large territory with several females. And we have quite a lot of information about their behavior and distribution. Here's a Eurasian otter. It's adaptable. Pollution is, of course, a major threat. It's still threatened, but it has recovered remarkably over much of its range. Good to know the United Kingdom no longer tracks and kills otters with dogs since the 1970s. And this is also true for basically all otters, if the pollution is absent, fish will return and otters will return soon after in many, many places. But otters are very susceptible to various types of pollutants, no matter where they are. The Clean Water Act in Europe and the United States and other regions was really instrumental in allowing otters to return. Now, because remember we talked about the Eurasian otter being called lutra and the New World otters right here are called lontra since the late 1960s. They're very similar in habits, in vocalizations, and also in their ecology. Now, the other types of otters, and this started with the fossil record, are an aeonics type otters. They occur in Asia and Africa, and in a sense, with sea otters are also more similar to aeonics than to lutra. Very social. Here, a father is showing a new cub to one of his other offspring. They live in groups. This is an African clawless otter, and also another type of African clawless otter. So there are basically 3 types of aeonics otters, with the sea otter being not older and slightly different from aeonics type otters. Now, aeonics type otters can be subarctic, as the sea otter is, and tropical over Asia and South America. It has its own special baculum or penis bone, and there's more variation between them in behavior and in appearance than between the lutra, lontra type otters. Oh, not quite yet, but I just wanted to add that the giant otter in South America is also in this category. It is also very social, families, and their behavior is similar to the Aonics type otters we were just talking about. Finally, anhydra, that is a sea otter, is also in this category because of its behavior and vocalizations. All of these otters are different in so many ways from the Lutra types, all the way back millions of years, which is once you realize that they're two very special different groups, you've made already a big step in understanding otters, their behavior, their evolution, and their role in their area of distribution. Now, one thing that's very interesting is that when you look at the brain of these different types of otters, you see a big difference in their whether they use their forepaws to grab things. They're called hand orientation. If you hold a fish above a Lutra otter and a Aonics type otter, the Lutra otter will crane its neck to grab it with its mouth. If the other otter, let's say a giant otter or Aonics cinereus or whatever, or even the sea otter, they will they'll reach up and grab it with their hands. That means that they're hand oriented rather than mouth oriented. Now, many carnivores grab a prey with their mouth, but not the Aonics otters. They will eventually put it in their mouth or do both, grab it and then bite it. But their hands come first, and that is proved by analyzing their brain specialization. I'm sorry, this is not what I want. You see, this is a Aonics congus. It's called the clawless otter. And you see a little hand? Well, each of those digits can be moved. Here's Aonics otter carrying fistfuls of chopped meat, rather than eating it right there. And this is, again, a large African clawless otter, and you see it using its hand to bring its food to the mouth. A Eurasian otter would never do this. And here's our small one, Aonics cinereus, rolling a stone and grabbing a fish with his hands first, feeling with and looking away at the same time, showing us that the sensitivity in their fingers, they don't need to look at it at the same time. Now, we're going to now go and look at where otters are occurring, and we're going to start with Asia because they are, in some places, 5 species of otter. The little small one, Aonics, that we just were talking about. Lutra sumatrana, which is like a Lutra, but still very different from the Eurasian Lutra otter that may occur for instance, in Borneo, they are 4 types of otters. So they fill different niches They may have similar in diets, but for instance, Lutra sumatrana is fish-oriented, and so is Lutogale, the smooth otter, which is really one of the most common otters in Asia. Aonic cinerea is much smaller. It's the smallest otter, and it tends to live in shallower water, forest streams, and swamps, rice paddies, that sort of thing. Lutra sumatrana lives in forests and swamps in southern Thailand, Malaysia, and also some of the islands of Asia, like Borneo, for instance. And Lutogale, the smooth otter, lives in swamps and coastal areas and in loud, noisy groups. And lutra, this is a subspecies, also occurs in Asia and uses often similar habitats to these other three species. It is seldom seen, as is Lutra sumatrana, very, very seldom seen, and every once in a while it pops up in areas where we thought it did not occur. Whereas Aonic cinereus and Lutogale are much more easy to see because they're often diurnal. Okay, I think now you can see that there are special groups, and this changes depending on the genetics. But Aonics and the smooth otter and the small little clawless otters, they are all together. Lutra and Lutra sumatrana are also share the same thing. And then we're going to talk about other otters that occur in different places. But you can see that some otters were here before. Aonix terranura, the giant Brazilian otter, and the sea otter came quite early on the evolutionary tree. So, but all otters still have threats. They are definitely not as extreme as they were in the 1960 when the fur trade was at its peak, but still, and we've talked about this, is really it's not just hunted for its skin, body parts, food, but also as pets. Drowning in net occurs a lot in Asia because the nets are cut into the small streams in the forest. So they are that is in a sense dangerous, a dangerous situation and higher pollution. So we were raving about how important CITES was in the 70s, in the mid 70s. And yes, many countries are signatories, but there's really not much enforcement in some areas, particularly in the live animal trade. And there, as with any convention, the older it gets, the more loopholes they are. And it's really not as strong as it should be as a convention. I think that we have made great progress in Asia, for instance, and South America, where we have made studies and um, created programs, but overall, they are still concerns, particularly in Asia. Now, trade routes, as you can see in Asia, are a little bit all over the place. And this shows, for instance, Bhutan, which is really more or less an unknown country, just had in the last 10 years its first otter survey. India has had many, many surveys, and otters keep on popping up. So there is a comeback there. In Sri Lanka, only lutra lutra occurs, whereas in well, it's not on the map. Okay, well, in some areas they have made amazing comebacks. So what do you do when you see these trade routes spreading? And one of the biggest trade routes is over the internet, where otters are offered for sale. Whether they exist or not is not always easy to find out. But the internet has been a huge problem for enforcing CITES regulations. So what do we do? Well, the sorts of things that we do is we write reports. This one was a report we did with traffic. And we have, in this case, it was just an analysis of seizures in selected Asian countries. But we have been able to log on to many websites that were offering otters for sale. In Japan, for instance, this species of otter, the small short-clawed otter, Aeonyx cinereus, can be found in cafes where they live in a small, very small enclosure, and people can touch them and feed them, and so their lifespan is pretty short. Now, another method of controlling the future of otters is by determining whether whether it's data deficient. Oh, no, 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 what are you doing? And it's called the Red List, which is another IUCN group that does this for basically all the animals, plants, even fungus in the world. It's a huge undertaking, but it's very, very useful. And each of the specialist groups has to furnish usually in 10 years or less, the categories on the red list for each of the species each group has under its I was going to say control, but it doesn't, definitely not, but that they are studying and protecting. And when you get to, for instance, otters cover everything from near threatened to endangered. And sometimes I feel that some of these endangered otters are also becoming critically endangered. It's a very useful thing to use from everything from funding or protection in the countries where they occur. Let's talk about the different species. The smooth-coated otter lives across Asia, and as a matter of fact, there is subspecies that lives in all the way over here in Iraq. There used to be marshes in southern Iraq where they occurred, and this is a different subspecies. It's very rare, and we know relatively little about it. However, at the other extreme, if you go into some countries in Asia, such as Singapore, you can see them every day. Why is that? Because the canals and were are no longer polluted, are free flowing, and have a very large fish population, and they have become quite used to being city dwellers, uh, and you can see them just by walking near the canals. It's quite amazing. There they are taking a stroll, and this is a large family group, which is very typical of this species. They get quite close. Some of them unfortunately get run over, but they get quite close to people and live happily side by side. They are studied very closely by groups of observers in Singapore. So we have a lot of data on how a few otters basically show up and create a large family group and are known often individually on an almost daily basis. They have bred very successfully, but look how close you can get to them in the wild. These are not pets. These are otters that have made an amazing comeback. Now, here's our small short-clawed otter, the smallest, again, widely distributed in Asia, and doing quite well in some areas and decreasing in others. They are often exported illegally as pets and disappearing from many regions where they used to thrive. So this map should show spots rather than this amazing distribution. Again, this is a hand-oriented otter, and you can see it playing with a little stone, looking away, playing only with its fingers. So it is really with the African clawless otters, a totally hand-oriented mammal. Lutra sumatrana, the rarest otter in Asia. It's, as you can see, its distribution is discontinuous. Oh, why is this doing this? And this is because in the beginning of the appearance of otters in Asia, many of these islands, etc., were connected. Now it's discontinuous. They are difficult to study in the wild, once because of their habitat, but also because they're much shyer than other species like the smooth otter and the short-clawed otter. It's rarely kept in captivity. it doesn't really do well in captivity, but this may also be because the captive conditions for them in Asia are not suitable, and it's an otter because of it's endangered, is not found in other zoos in other countries. Oh, well, we all like that photograph, right? I'm sorry, okay. What's interesting about the hairy-nosed otter, look at its habitat. Marshlands in really dense forests, and it does something that other otters don't do. It climbs trees to mark its territory. And it is an otter which we really don't have enough observations in the wild. This was the first time it was really discovered in southern Thailand in the 80s, late 70s, early 80s. As you can see, it looks very similar with its nails, etc., like the Eurasian otter, but it is quite different. Again, it's an otter that doesn't do well in captivity, but the Eurasian otter, its look-alike, does well in captivity and breeds. So this is still a question mark species. We need to know more, but it's very elusive, and you usually see it with a camera trap, but not for or a few minutes. So this is we need more volunteers in Asia to look for it and to really work on it some more. We've talked a little bit about vocalizations. We don't know much about the vocalizations of this species, but it is a Lutra species, so it does not live in large groups. It lives usually solitary or a mother with her cubs. Now, here is an otter that has an amazing distribution and has made a comeback in many of those countries and is doing much better. It's protected across Europe and quite a few other countries. And it interestingly, for instance, in Asia, this is not seen on this map. It also occurs in Borneo, and in Borneo you have at least, yeah, you have 5 species of otter. You have this one, the Eurasian. You have the Lutra sumatrana, the hairy-nosed otter, and you have the short-clawed, the smallest otter, and the smooth otter, which is the largest otter in Asia. We have many, many studies of the Eurasian otter, and so we have done this for almost 50 years, because it was one of the first otters studied in Sweden, as we mentioned. And in the beginning, this map would look very, very different. There'd be little dots here and there. It doesn't mean that this whole area is connected, but it certainly is a distribution that has improved remarkably. Now, one thing about all otters is when they have the condition and the protection they deserve, they do well and make a return. We had a meeting in Korea a while back and visited the demilitarized zone. Now, after the Korean War in the 1950s, this place was totally devastated. And they created a kind of no man's land called the demilitarized zone between North and South Korea, which over the decades became reforested. And now, and it's hard to understand, where did they come from? There was so much destruction north and south, and it was known as really a tabula rasa, meaning there was nothing there. And in this demilitarized zone now, there's a huge uh, list of endangered species, including the Eurasian otter. It made a return. And if you think this is amazing, uh, this is what happened also. This is a pair of Eurasian otters in Borneo in a one of the only uh, large reserves. And for decades, we had a conference in Borneo in 2010, I think. Um, and I had to stand up at their request and say that the Eurasian otter no longer occurred in Borneo. And 4 years later, one of my graduate students went there and took a photograph of a pair of Eurasian otters. We were absolutely totally amazed because we had also sent another student who found smooth otters, short clawed otters, and smooth otters in that reserve. So we were sure that it was impossible. So don't always think that something has disappeared, because given the right conditions, they will, might, or can return. Now, one of the charismatic otters is definitely the sea otters. And again, they have a long record of fossils, and they look as if they're wearing mittens, really. Well, believe it or not, they have very active fingers in those mittens. They are more closely related to Aeonyx type otters and not at all to Lutra type otters. They have made a remarkable comeback since they were almost hunted to extinction by the beginning of the last century. But they are doing well. They've been reintroduced in a number of places in Alaska. Of course, they also occur off of California. It's a different subspecies. And all the way to Japan, where there are a few in the most northern part of the islands of Japan. Now, when they began the first attempted reintroductions, it didn't work at all because they died of overheating in cages when they were being transported. Again, we didn't know about the husbandry or the threats to these species. So it took a while to really learn to do what was necessary. But recently, 6 otters were transported from Alaska. These were otters that had been rescued and brought up in Alaska. They went all the way from Alaska to Abu Dhabi, which is right here, and they built special large individual crates with crates by very, very large crates where they had a warm place to sleep and water. and they all arrived in perfect health. So we've come a long way with very difficult transportation methods for otters and husbandry that is really so much better than it was really not that long ago. Now, an otter is a very kind of interesting experiment. It's like no other otter, and it's very large. Uh, it's very well adapted to being aquatic, but it doesn't really behave like other otters for so many reasons. Just the way it spends most of its time as in the ocean. It does go it does go on beaches and sleep, but it can sleep while floating on its back. We discovered that when sea otters were reintroduced, they would do, and this again depends sometimes where, but they would eat all the sea urchins. And when they ate the sea urchins, their habitat changed. It became a kelp forest, a seaweed forest, where fish returned, and while they mainly eat invertebrates, they have a direct effect on their habitat. They There have been several things that have happened, which is um, amazing. Is in the past there was a large fur seal population which crashed, and also due to warming, a lot of these fur seals moved out of the area, and a large predator, the orca, discovered that sea otters were so easy because they just, would come and decimate these floating sea otters. And an orca is a very large dolphin, and this is a head of a sea otter, a skull of a sea otter, and this is so they ate sea otters like popcorn. Some of the researchers have said it decimated population on some in the Aleutians Islands by 90% in the early 90s. And they've made a comeback by going into relatively shallow protected water, and but 90% of the population crashed in the Aleutian Islands. So unexpected things when you think that the sea otters have made a comeback, there may be something around the bend that is going to decimate them. They also have, of course, there have been oil spills in Alaska. California sea otters have made a comeback, but so slowly. They're just around 3,000 of them now over the last 40 years. I mean, very slow recovery. But those big mittens eating with their hands, does this remind you of anybody? I always call this the no see, no hear, you know, they use their paws all the time to aerate their fur, which is they keep it very clean because they don't have blubber like other seals, and See, I'm not doing anything. So, fascinating animals, beautiful animals, and with the fur of any mammal that is the most dense. They say a million hairs per uh, square inch. Sometimes it feels really beautiful, and you understand how they were almost uh, wiped out and until very recently, until the 1900s. They've made a very nice comeback, and this is already if this was their original distribution, and now there are points where they have made a very good comeback. And this is the famous Aleutian Islands where the orcas discovered a quick meal. And Kamchatka has some here, but by the time they get to um Japan, there are very, very few of them there. So see that what has been happening in the recovery of this of the giant, so not the giant otter, the sea otter, uh, and its recovery. But of course, there are conflicts because sea otters love clams and um, other things that humans eat. So conflicts in region for um, fishermen. I remember once in California talking about sea otters, and there was a large conflict with crabs and um, clams, and so we had a meeting with very angry uh, fishermen. And when I gave a presentation, I said, "Look, there's something I don't understand, but I want to show you one slide." And on the slide, it showed how many new permits had been uh, distributed for fishermen, and the population of sea otters. So you have a very steep curve going up for the number of permits, and the population of sea otters was very small and not increasing. And I said, that's the problem right there. Uh, Recovery is not based on take. You're the people who are, taking the seafood of the otters, and so that brought a very nice reprieve for the sea otters, which they were promising to shoot on sight. They never did. Um, Now, another thing about sea otters, we talked about orcas killing them, but we've noticed in California that um, sharks are making an impact, and they the great white sharks, of course, are present there, and they come up under the otter and grab it, which usually kills it, and then they kind of spit it out because they're chasing seals, and I don't know, maybe uh, the sea otters taste different, but they usually do not eat them. And the otters, of course, end up on the beach, and so we can keep tabs on the fact that this is increasing because the population of great white sharks in California is increasing. The conservation issues of this very charismatic species is we've already had a very large oil spill in California in the 1980s, and climate change is having an effect. Uh, there, because of the conflict in areas where they have thrived after reintroduction, is illegal harvesting, usually by the people who are in conflict, fishermen and shellfish. We talked about the predation in Alaska and the sharks in California. But in some of these areas, also because of climate change, they are the population is not increasing as fast as it does in other areas, particularly in California, where it has had such a hard time reaching a minimum population density of 3,000. The population increase in Alaska has been much faster. Okay, here is an otter we have in the United States. It's definitely a Lutra type otter. It does not live in groups. A male has a large territory, sometimes with several females in it. Least concerned. And why is that? Because in 1980, it had been extirpated from at least 24 states. These were the states where it did not occur, New Mexico and North Dakota. So it was reintroduced on a state-by-state basis, and sometimes to areas such where it no longer occurred, to areas where they were already present, but in very, very low number. And now, this is, of course, Canada, where North America has now totally recovered its North American otter population. But, and for instance, this was one of the last areas that where otters have been reintroduced successfully. Now, California still has a export. It's protected by CITES, and the areas where the reintroduced populations have done so well that the Fish and Wildlife Service, each state has its own Fish and Wildlife Service, and some of them now they're issuing trapping licenses again. And this is hard to understand because each state in the United States controls its wildlife. These three states, for instance, protect otters, and they've never had a problem. For instance, Florida has a thriving population of otters, as does Louisiana and these coastal states. But if they want to export otters overseas, which of course Canada does, people are really perplexed, and they say America is not respecting the red list, or they can't understand. They say, and this has never been verified, 20,000 otter pelts are exported a year. This is really not true, because if you look at the only states where they have reopened trapping, there are not 20,000 otters, and there are not, they have not been taken, of course, from states that protect it. Washington State and Oregon have, and Louisiana are the main contributors to otter for reintroduction to these areas. And that reintroduction program has been very successful. And so that we feel that, number one, they will not be exported in large numbers, or they would not have been able to maintain, particularly in states that used to trap them in large numbers. They are being protected. The reintroduced populations are doing very well. So the good news for the North American otter is that really they have made a remarkable recovery. Again, the Clean Water Act made a huge difference. And unfortunately, very recently, the legislation of the Clean Water Act has been largely reduced, as have many other conservation initiatives in the United States, and we hope this will not last too long, and we will get our parks and funding back again. So we need to all pray for a government change as quickly as possible. Now, look at all these otters down here. This is the neotropical otter, which is widely distributed. It's doing well, decreasing in some parts because of development, but and it is protected in quite a few of these countries. South America has, I'm going to say, used to have 4, and now has 5 otter species. An interesting otter species there is Lontra felina, which is a coastal otter, a coastal marine otter. This is kind of hopeful. It's a little bit discontinuous distribution, but doing much better. We had a congress in Peru recently, and some of us saw this otter for the very first time, which was very exciting. So there are rocky and beach areas in their distribution. We have seen them inside really busy harbors, and along with fur seals. There are some conflicts, but they have also realized that their presence attracts tourism, among other things. And they are, what happened here? They seem to be settling in some areas. Dogs attack them on beaches. There are conflicts with fisheries, of course, and there's some areas with pollution, but they are certainly doing better than they were 20 years ago. They have the same predators as sea otters, but they spend more time on land than sea otters, and of course are Lontra otters and not Aonix type otters. Now, Lontra provocax, this is a very, how can I put it, positive distribution map, because they are largely, oh, this will drive me nuts. They are largely absent from many of these areas. Um, uh, if you along the coast, they sometimes are in the same areas as Felina and have disappeared and are really more in national parks and areas that are far from human population than this map implies. Provocax has a problem, and in Chile and Argentina, is that there are conflicts with salmon fish farms that are very extended and really happen to coincide with the last remaining habitat of Lontra provocax. Mink are a problem, but fish farms shooting them on sight are a graver problem because this is one of the otters with the smallest populations in South America. This is an otter we should be very worried about. And IUCN wrote a letter to the government explaining that, it needed more protection, but we haven't seen that yet. Now, the exciting moment. This is the 14th species of otter between Mexico and Colombia. It's the Lontra annectens. Now, notice it's Lontra, and it shares many similarities with other Lontra species in South America, but its genetic analysis shows us that it's definitely a different species. And if I can make a prediction, I think that there are other Lontra species that are described as the neotropical otter, which we will discover are also different species. Now, way back when in the before 1968, there were a lot of species of this Lontra type in South America. I think there were at least 5, based on the shape of their rhinarium. We didn't really have genetics that we could analyze with in those days, but so the Mexican otter specialists decided to really analyze this and came up with a name which already had. Lontra annectens was a name that they had in the 60s as a different species, which is why I think we're going to discover through genetics that there are others. So we may have a few more new species, which is very exciting. To the African species, we're getting there. Hydrictis is a very interesting otter because in some ways it's not, it used to be called Lutra maculocalis, but because of its so many differences, including its vocalizations, it was classified in its own genus. Lontra and Lutra type species have quite a few similar vocalization. But this one, for instance, when we're talking about canadensis, I say its greeting when it greets you is, well, when Hydrictis greets you, it goes like F, 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 and it does not have that well-known Lutra vocalization. The thing that changes among otters in their vocalizations, their alarm vocalizations or threat vocalizations are similar. What changes is the social sounds. Some of the aeonics type sounds, for instance, are very similar and totally absent in Lutra. Sea otters also have quite different sounds. They're a social species. So if you saw an otter somewhere and gave uh, uh, tried to approach it and talk with it, you would soon know, ah, this is obviously aeonics and not Lutra. So uh, I hope you learn more about vocalizations. And when you see an otter I remember seeing an otter. I was running very early in the morning, and it was in a little canal in Florida. And so I immediately flattened myself on the ground and started talking to it, which totally blew its mind to hear somebody talking otter. And it stayed around with me for quite a long time. So, you know, try it when you see one. So here it is. You see very much a Lutra type appendage here with strong nails, uh, spots. That's why it's called maculae collis, because it has spots. Some are quite extensive, but it has a slightly different shape in its head. It's not as long a snout as in Lutra type otters. Um, so it also, the reason otters they're called, the real technical name is mestigial vibrissae. They need those hairs on to detect prey in water, mercury. And when, let's say, a fish touches this, their reaction is immediate to turn their head and catch it. Some otters have, as we uh, will see, have much heavier mestigial vibrissae or mustache. Aeonyx capensis is a large otter, and its distribution, again, these are very optimistic distributions, but you can see it, for instance, quite easily in South Africa. When you see it, for instance, in Angola, you'd be very lucky because they're one country that um, traps them. And crocodiles, Nile crocodiles, not only eat uh, large mammals and people. More people are killed by Nile crocodiles than other species of crocodile. Um, they notice fingers, so we know what they do. They catch fish, and often in the mud, they will be absolutely sitting on a bank and just looking away, and suddenly it will come up with uh, a worm, a fish, an insect, and eat it. But in other words, they can hunt through their hands alone. There are two of these clawless otters in Africa. This one is the more common one and often visible one. And there they are, going from sweet water to salt water. They love lobster and crabs, much to the distress of uh, their human neighbors. This is one of the least known and uh, unstudied otters of the central part of Africa. They're called, they used to be Congo clawless otter, but they, wait a second, they really are not just there. I studied them in Côte d'Ivoire, in Gabon and Côte d'Ivoire. And I was amazed that they ate really large scarab beetles. And that may be something that they're also looking for with their fingers. Um, they are kept rarely in captivity. I only saw one in captivity, and have been kept as pets on several people in Africa. And the otters, in a sense, if kept well in good conditions, are fine, but they can also be incredibly aggressive. Gavin Maxwell, for instance, the British author who wrote quite a few books on otters, had an assistant whose fingers were chewed, not all off, but some off by the pet otter that suddenly had a temper tantrum. So I wouldn't recommend it. Now, one of our favorite, at least one of my favorite species, of course, is Pteronura brasiliensis, the giant river otter. This is an otter that, remember I said was rated in the 60s as one of the 10 most endangered carnivores in the world. It has made a really wonderful comeback since then, and has been well studied. And but as an example of things that are so surprising, in the Pantanal, which is a magnificent wetland area in south west, not really south, well, western Brazil, has a very large population of otters, but also of jaguars. Both of them have made a great comeback in the area, and jaguars have suddenly realized that giant otters are quite tasty. And so my endangered species has been eaten by your endangered species occurs. But it's a worry. Now, has the giant otter made a comeback? Yes, it has made a spectacular comeback. It is rare in many areas, and it's endangered in many areas, but it has been well studied in Peru, Suriname, and Brazil. But what's happening is it's not, there are some conflicts on some rivers, definitely. But the worst thing, I think, is that the price of gold is now at $5,000 an ounce or something. And you have strings of boats, even on large rivers, and many, many rivers, collecting gold and polluting the river beyond repair. I made a survey in Guyana and saw this much lesser extent of gold mining than in other countries like Peru or whatever. The rivers turn a muddy color, and the fish populations really disappear. And this is happening in many areas of South America. So am I worried about the giant river otter that made such a spectacular comeback? Yes. It of course occurs also in forest streams and small rivers, and outside of gold mining locales. But in the Guyanas, for instance, Guyana, uh, Suriname, and French Guyana had really wonderful populations because their countries were really so uninhabited. But those three countries, for instance, are mining for gold, and we have to keep a very close watch on this because basically there's nothing we can do about it. So I am worried about my favorite otter. Now, why study a species, particularly that has such a broad distribution, at least on a map, is that they're still vulnerable and they are also new threats appear, like jaguars, that were reintroduced or protected too successfully as far as giant otters were concerned. But climate change directly affects giant otters. They live in a regime of rainy season, dry season. And with climate change, this has really disrupted that uh, rainy season where otters go into the flooded forest, and dry season is when they have their cubs. Now, in certain areas of South America, they have two um, rainy or dry seasons. It no longer follows that, which has gone for thousands of years of a very scheduled rainy season, dry season. So giant otters have cubs once a year. In captivity, they can have them twice a year, but in the wild, because of this rainy, dry season, what happens if they're disturbed? Too many people, too many predators, they stop having cubs, which the same can be said about other species, of course. But it's really worrying. I don't know whether climate change has affected other otter species quite a the same extreme fashion. So, as we protect otters in across the world, we see changes occurring that we were not expected. Sometimes good changes, where they make a sudden reappearance, as in as in other areas for instance, Singapore is a very good example of a spectacular return of a local predator. So what's the future? I think it's really good in this photograph was taken in the Pantanal. As you can see, I'm very close. They were well adapted to people in that area. But what happens is that, for instance, when people make a distribution of otters, they often say it occurs all over here. Well, they're actually in that map, there are a few rivers, and otters don't occupy the whole river. They have tiny little territories in the dry season where they're separated sometimes by many kilometers from the next one, and they only occupy a small length of the river. So, and this is true of maps and estimation of population numbers of otters all over the world, is that you have to really know how much of a portion of the river the otters occupy. Um, and giant otters breed once a year. Uh, sometimes they don't. So a female who lives to about 8 years old, if that, in the wild, can have maybe three litters in her lifetime. And a litter is usually two, three, sometimes four, but small numbers. So basically, an otter group replaces themselves, maybe in their lifetime, because not all cubs uh, uh, reach adulthood. So they live only maybe 5 years, maximum 8 in really good areas. Uh, and if you compare them, for instance, to the otters in Singapore, uh, they have more than one litter, and they were raising them quite successfully. So, is the future good for giant otters? Yes, with the maximum protection, but we certainly need a better uh, climate change than we have now. See here, these are the list of otters. Everything is decreasing or steady recovery. Certainly, that's true again of certain Asian otters. Um, like the ones in Singapore, they have made a spectacular recovery without really too many conflicts. Uh, Other otters are really having conflicts, such as Longfrep overcox, the southern otter with who conflicts with a fish farms that are only multiplying in exactly over its last remaining small distribution. So what we need, I think that this is the most important, is we need more field biologists, because once you start studying otters, you never quit because you love it. So please get your students, get anybody off the street who loves otters or whatever. We can train them and we can help them, and the otters need them. So before you dash off, please go to our website. We have a lot more stories about otters and games and things you can download, articles you can download. If you want to be brainwashed further with otters, that's the place to go. Thank you. It's been fun, and I hope that you continue to enjoy otters as much as I do. If you have any questions or something, write to me or send it to the Otter Youth Circle. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much, Nicole. This has been a great talk, and I think it's always amazing to me how much knowledge and experience you have with, not just one or two species of otters, but all 14 species of otters. And I think it's really a privilege for everyone here as well as everyone in the world really to have you be involved in the knowledge of otters and otter conservation and
Okay.
really the whole world of otters. So um with the last part, as you mentioned, there's still a lot of work that needs to be of to be done in terms of otter conservation. There's climate change, habitat loss, conflict, and wildlife trade. So really, we need more people to be on board to love otters, protect otters, study otters, and I hope that today with World Otter Day, you can take your first step. If you need any extra information, visit the Otter Specialist Group website that we'll put a link in the caption below, or reach out to us at the Otter Youth Circle, and yeah, we're definitely happy to answer your questions or share more information or connect you with the right people. So with that, we'd like to thank Nicole again for this wonderful presentation, and I would like to wish everyone a happy World Otter Day. See you. Bye bye.